What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Puzzle Huddle with Experts. I have a fantastic scholar, Dr. Donna Oti. She's a PhD scholar in communication. She's a wife. She's a mom. She has a lot of international perspective. So we're hoping to get a lot of good information from her. And I'm very excited to have her. So thank you. Good morning, Dr. Oti.
Good morning, Matthew. It's a pleasure being here. I'm equally excited about both your program and then also an opportunity to share a little bit about my background with you as well.
Just to ground us all in terms of the launching point for our conversation, can you describe what your academic and professional expertise is?
Oh, so my academic and professional expertise is communication, particularly strategic and organizational communication. So I see myself as a communication researcher that uses my background, my academic preparation to help organizations to actually put some of the theory into action. So I'm a researcher, but I like to work closely with organizations to achieve a specific goal that they may have.
All right. And before you were inspired to pursue a PhD in this topic, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood? What might have been some of your favorite childhood toys and games?
So as a child, I actually grew up to a certain extent in Guyana, South America. And then I moved to Nashville, Tennessee when I was about 12 years old, and then to Columbia, Tennessee, where I graduated high school. So as a child, I really loved playing outdoors. We didn't have television when I was a child. We didn't have video games. So I would play something called Chinese skipping. That was my favorite game. And so yes, being outdoors.
What are the rules? What are the rules for Chinese skipping?
It reminds me a little bit of double jumps, except the ropes aren't moving. So you have like two ropes, and then you're jumping in and out, and you're crossing the ropes. And so there's really several games that you can play with it, but it's jumping all day long and lots of exercise. And that was actually my favorite game.
What do you think for a person to do to pursue a PhD? One might assume that they were always a good student, but can you describe your academic elementary school? Were you always a good student, or
right? Well, my parents are very firm that we have to take our academics seriously. So most of the things that they did was designed to help us have a good education. So I had a strong foundation, but in terms of being just the most scholarly student, I wouldn't see myself as such. I think early in my career, my dad's an engineer, my mom's a nurse, and I think they really wanted us to do sciences. Yeah. And I didn't realize that earlier, but that's just simply not my gift. So I actually entered undergraduate school as an engineer. And I soon realized that path was not for me. So I majored in technical communication, and that enabled me to communicate about sciences. So even though that's when I really started to blossom, is when I started to study communication and writing and preparing myself to be a journalist. So that's I was a strong student, but I think I really blossomed after making that transition.
You mentioned some of your favorite childhood games. Do you remember at all what your favorite childhood books were? What kind of reading you were into?
So I actually, I read the early reading books that are, of course, it's pretty controversial a little bit now, but of course, Dr. Seuss and some of the other early readers. But then as I grew older, I enjoyed reading Pride and Prejudice. I enjoyed Aunt Mame. I enjoyed a number of books that we called Nancy Drew. I don't know if you're familiar with that. We read in Guyana, we read a lot of books that would have come up in the British tradition. So yes, okay. So Jane Eyre's Pride and Prejudice, Jane Austen, those were some of my favorites.
I don't want to leave your childhood until I get a little bit more information about the cultural experience growing up in Guyana. Mm-hmm. Can you just describe what the life and times in the environment, what that was like for you growing up?
Yeah, so I was actually growing up in Guyana where there were actually a lot of economic challenges. One of the challenges came out of a number of developing countries in the post-independent era had a difficulty getting foreign exchange to really grow their economies. So what that looked like for the average individual is inflation very quickly, and the standard of living for people started to diminish. So I wasn't so aware aware of that so much at that time. But again, the resources that the average Guyanese had significantly went down over the period. But it's interesting that my mom, she was a teacher at that time. So she really decided that she was going to bring us to the United States in order for us to get a better education. Because at one point, Guyana had one of the highest literacy rates in the Caribbean, and then it was steadily declining to a point when it actually had among the lowest. So my childhood was my mom telling us stories about well, she has two daughters, me and my sister. You're going to get a great education, and I'm going to help that happen. So making a little bit of sacrifices to save money to make this journey was actually something that we thought about as an adventure. So I didn't really see myself as being poor. I saw myself as working with my mom to build a better future for me and my sister.
Nowadays, parents and the environment, we're bringing so much awareness to our kids in terms of STEM careers, even at a young age. And I think I heard you mention that your parents kind of introduced those topics to you. How does that show up in your life? Is that a dinner conversation saying you have to be an engineer, or is that going to museums, or what does that look like in your home?
No. Well, no, I think how it showed up is my mom. Well, I think globally, but particularly in the Caribbean, we actually look at fields as being superior and inferior. And
Wow.
it's not, people think that, oh, science may be better than music, and science, pursuing a career in science is better than pursuing a career in music. And I don't think that this was intentional, but I think parents often made the arguments in terms of how much money you'll be able to make. Oh, there's so many starving artists. I'm much more of an artist. So my parents, I don't think they intentionally, I can't think of anything concrete that they did to say that science was the direction that we should go in. But I think as many parents in the Caribbean, they want their parents to be lawyers or doctors. So they may cultivate that by buying you chemistry sets or doctor suits or things like that. So subconsciously, so maybe it wasn't even intentional, subconsciously you believe that some of those science and engineering fields were where you should go. And I think younger people today have a much more sense of self because schools prepare them to understand themselves. When I was coming up, it was just like the smart kids do well in math and the smart kids do well in sciences. And we didn't recognize that the kids who are doing well in English and reading and writing are able to contribute differently, but equally important to the society.
Yeah, what were some of your childhood passions? I believe for a lot of people that pursue a PhD, that there's some evidence of that interest in their childhood.
Well, I don't know. I can't point out to what that evidence was. I always liked telling stories. So while my sister, she was more experimenting by piercing my ears at the age 3, she was more interested in scientific things and looking at frogs and looking at animals and things like that. That would never appeal to me. But what appealed to me was writing in my diary, writing stories, and actually telling stories to my friends and family members at an early age.
All right, now I'm going to jump ahead, but I may come back to your childhood if you mentioned something that I want to just go capture. But if you could fast forward me to your PhD and your doctoral research, what did you study for your dissertation?
So for my dissertation, I studied media politics and modern democracy, and I looked specifically at newspapers in Guyana to see how they covered elections in the post-independent era. I was specifically looking at issues that were of importance to both the African and the Asian American or the Indian American community in Guyana to see how what issues they were concerned about, and then to see how they were framed in the media. So it's looking at media, politics, and race. Those were things that tend to interest me.
And coming out of that research, did you find that the elections were pretty evenly covered in terms of perspectives and priorities, or do you think it was kind of skewed in terms of one portion of the population?
You know, it was interesting to see what issues people felt were important, and I don't think it's campaigns are deliberate. So a lot of times the campaigns themselves may mask the true challenges on the ground. So in the advertisements, you found that both political parties seem to be very empathetic to the needs of the other. However, in reality, oftentimes you don't see that rhetoric going into practice. So while I found the campaigns weren't really were more balanced in terms of their concern for the other ethnic groups, we don't see that translating into practices where policies are translating into this system of equity across the races. So yes.
Now, for that to have been your dissertation research, that must really inform how you experience the current news environment in the United States. And just through, you probably can't help but to kind of be critical of the different perspectives that show up in the news. How does your research influence just how you perceive the world in the United States right now?
So what I see in the United States trial is a great polarization of media. And before the people in the third world or the developing world, people argue that it's not possible for media to be unbiased. And then a Western education will say, yes, we can, there's certain levels of objectivity that we can put these systems in place to make the news media more objective. And there seems to be a pulling away from that perspective where you see media kind of doubling down on their view of the world and negating other worldviews. So what I see now is it's really, Fox and MSNBC, there's little adherence or commitment to true objectivity. And some scholars from the developing world was arguing, well, that was never possible and in the first place. But it's just right now, it's just so evident in terms of how news is covered by different media.
And why that topic for your dissertation research? Out of all the things to study, why was that? Why did you kind of focus on that as the topic that you wanted to research?
I think because my grandfather was a politician, and I think because I grew up in this. Let me go back to my childhood again. I grew up in a place, well, at first I was living in a place named Linden, which was a very African Guyanese community. And in that environment, most of my friends were African Guyanese. And we had little nursery rhymes that would, that said some things that were a little bit derogatory about other races. I won't repeat that nursery rhyme. But then we moved into another community that was predominantly Indian American. And I heard those kids saying the same nursery rhymes, but instead of the other ethnic groups, they were talking about African Guyanese. So at a very early age, I understood that within Guyana, there was some racial polarization that affected the way in which we looked at each other. So, and then there was one thing that one of my teachers in this new Indian environment said, he said, we're all the same. And I don't remember the context in which he was giving us this lecture, but he was saying we're all the same. And our cultural practices are dictate how we worship and how we eat and how we do other things, but we're equals. And that's a message that stayed with me for a long, long time. So I've often been interested in working in communications to help bridge the gaps between different perceptions of ethnic minorities, and in order to maybe move the society to a conversation of respect, of equity.
Yeah, can you help me just to ground me in the demographics of Guyana? What are the major and minor groups in terms of population and minority groups? Well, what is the composition of the population there?
Yes, so the majority group would be Asian Guyanese, or specifically Guyanese of Indian descent. And then the second largest majority would be African Guyanese, people of African descent. So, but historically, there's been cases where the dominant party was, or the ruling party was predominantly African Guyanese, and then other times in history where the predominant ruling party was composed primarily of Indian Guyanese. So whoever's in power, there's often perceptions that the ethnic group that's not in power may be experiencing some discrimination in terms of access to jobs or contracts or other critical institutional systems necessary for their development.
All right. Now, how have you been able to mobilize all of that academic research and your personal experience growing up? How have you mobilized that into a professional career? What is it that you do today that kind of captures all of that stuff?
Okay, so what I'm doing today is I'm actually working on a research project. It's called Bridging the Gaps, Recruiting Asian American and Black African Americans for COVID-19 clinical trials and creating culturally competent messages. And so there's a little bit of background. You may know that there's an underrepresentation of ethnic minorities in clinical trials. Absolutely. And the National Academies of Science, they recently, but maybe 2 weeks ago, they came out with a report saying that this is actually causing us billions of dollars. So you can imagine the fact that there's little data on how medications interact with these minority groups can lead to them getting less care. I mean, so the disparities in healthcare are a result, but then the individuals are dying younger. So their families are losing the economic value of their work. And there's the healthcare costs because people with chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, even asthma and so forth, they are not able to work as much as individuals who may be healthy. So what I'm doing is trying to understand perceptions of Asian Americans, and we're doing that through social focus group research, as well as African Americans, and in a way of helping researchers to communicate more effectively with them, develop more culturally appropriate messages that could theoretically improve the recruitment of individuals from these groups.
Yeah, because from a cultural perspective, one message won't fare equally across these different populations. There'll be different kind of filters that play, especially with African Americans. I know that the health industry has had, there's been a historical track record of some micro aggressions toward us. So yeah, we filter these messages differently.
Yes, yes. And even within the African American community, what we're finding is that different demographics or people with different experiences, they have a need for messages that are specifically tailored to them. I'll give you one example. A lot of times people think that African Americans are reluctant to participate in clinical trials because of some past malpractices, right? And how that shows up in the world is that a number of recruiters won't invest the time in recruiting people from populations that they believe there's going to be a low return on their investment. But what we're finding is that particularly in cases where individuals may have participated in clinical trials out of a specific need. So we know, for example, sickle cell anemia, this affects African and Latino communities, or we know that there's a higher level of diabetes among our communities. So when we have adults who participate in this study and they're informed about the importance of their role in providing vital data that can help other individuals, we find that they're more likely to participate, but they're also more likely to be advocates. We also found that once when the messenger comes from places like HBCUs or communities that are traditionally working with people of color, the message is a lot more receptive. So there are things, even though there's underrepresentation now, there are strategies that scientists can employ to start bridging those gaps. And so it's wonderful to be in the room with individuals who are having the conversations about how do we bridge these gaps, and that will lead to health equity and reducing some of the disparities that we now see, particularly we've observed in the environment of COVID-19, the disparities in terms of the debt. I mean, we can't afford to continue having that in our society.
Yeah, if we take a look at what it affects the African-American populations, the diabetes, the blood pressure, and then, globally with what looks like a series of viruses, yet making sure these messages are meaningful for each unique population so that we can help get the adoption level of whatever solution is appropriate for the challenge. Yeah. Wow. Thank goodness somebody's behind the things, helping the scientists to think, because science is science, and then communication and marketing and empathy and connection, it's almost two different professional skills. So you need all the people in play to first create the solution, but then also to service that to the populations. Well, what else can we do to help, help? And then I'm thinking about age changes, right? So young people receive messages different than more mature people. Gosh, what else can we do to make sure our family, friends, and loved ones are getting the information they need to make good decisions about health and solutions?
Yeah, so I think what's really critical is that communicators have to meet people where they are. Yeah. So I think people under 35, they're probably not reading the Washington Post or the New York Times, right? So social media plays a really big role. I think what you are doing is critical because I'm not a scientist, I love science, but you have a lot of scientists who come on that are giving wonderful advice in these other areas about their career, but then also about what individuals could do to stay healthy, to promote health education, to promote science and STEM education. So I think it's about what you're doing. You're communicating and finding new avenues to communicate where you can meet people where they are. So, yes.
Yeah. Now, a lot of my viewers are parents. So can you help me understand how your academic background and then also your professional background, how does that influence how you parent the children that you have?
Okay, so I have one daughter, she's 15, and she's just into high school. And so my husband is an engineer. I am this communication specialist. We were actually even in DC. We actually recently moved to Madison, Alabama. So my daughter got into a STEM school in DC. My husband was really excited about that. McKinley Tech was where she was going before we moved down here. And as we moved down here, I knew she's a wonderful writer. She won an essay competition about maybe 2 years ago, and she writes, prolifically. She's always liked writing. She's very creative. Now she did are you familiar with 16 personalities? It's kind of like an online assessment that mirrors the Myers-Briggs. Okay. So after you take the assessment, you find out that you're one of 16 personalities. And my daughter's personality is what we would usually associate with a debater. So somebody who would go into law.
Tell me what the name of it is again, just so I can make sure I Google it.
Yes, 16 personalities. It's just the number 16, the word personalities.com, and you can take the free assessment. So, and it tells you, kind of what your type is. So my daughter's a debater, and I could really see that in her personality. So I was happy to nurture her, even though my husband is STEM and would love for her to do STEM. I mean, we all both agreed that after looking at her personality and looking at how she shows up in the world, that we're going to support her on this more. She's also very interested in Black Lives Matter, and I think her essay that she won actually dealt heavily with that topic. So we are nurturing her in terms of what we feel. It's not only what we feel, but what we see through hard evidence for like personality assessments and on what she excels in school to really guide her to do something that's in line with her natural gifts and talents. So
yeah, I'm guessing that assessment was not around when you were a child for your parents to have put you through the 16 and then help to support whatever the results were.
Yeah, it took me a long way to figure this out because, I told you I started engineering, then I did technical writing. My first job was actually a journalist from McGraw-Hill Publications. So I had the honor of reporting on the Hill. I even covered some White House events. So I didn't understand then that my gift was really communication. It took, because I kept thinking, maybe I would do something in science at some point, but I didn't have the benefit of understanding my personality. When I took my personality assessment the first time, I took Myers-Briggs, and that's when I found out that I'm a communicator, I'm a diplomat. I'm better with relationships. So it would have been great to have that knowledge earlier on, but I don't regret it at all, because I tried different things. And I think part of the beauty of developing your career is the journey of actually exploring different things and coming to realize where you kind of fit.
Yeah, it's really, and it sounds like you're able to reconcile both, because to be the interpreter between the technical scientists and the medicine, and then bringing that, in terms of a communication messaging, you have to have a little bit of an interest in the science in order to really grasp and understand it and plate that message for a larger audience. I want to talk a little bit about some of your international work. I saw on your LinkedIn profile that you've done some research, advocacy, journalism, in different markets. What have been some of the international projects that you've worked on?
So my fellowship was, I had a SIF fellowship. So one of my early things I did in my doctoral career was I had the opportunity to go to Japan and actually review the research of other fellows people were competing for additional grants for their dissertation research. So I went to Japan. Another thing that I did, I actually went to Korea to work for the University of Maryland. Then it was called University College. Now it's called Global Campus. And I actually not only got to teach American military personnel, but I also got to teach some Korean nationals. I thought that was really exciting. After that, I got a Fulbright, my first Fulbright award. And I was able to spend a year in Nigeria, actually teaching journalism. But what's interesting enough, I actually worked very closely with the ICT directorate, and here helping them to communicate a number of what they were doing. We actually did a few papers that came out of that work. So even though I was teaching journalism, I was working with the ICT team to communicate, to help faculty members incorporate some technologies for teaching, and really being an advocate for ICT adoption on university-wide. And so most recently, I had the opportunity to work for a year in Guyana, South America, my home, where I worked as a talent management and learning specialist for CARICOM, which is kind of equivalent to the African Union, or mini United Nations would be a way I would describe it. So yeah, I'm curious. I love exploring. So I love opportunities to learn from other cultures. And I feel really blessed that I've had those opportunities.
Yeah, and maybe I got two more things that I want to explore, because this offering a kind of a personality test to your child, it seems very interesting to me. What inspired that process? Was that recommended to you? Was it a school initiative, or what brought you to that place?
Right. So I actually, because I do organizational development, I'm a trainer. And so I do I'm actually certified to administer the Myers-Briggs, and I'm certified to administer some emotional intelligence and DISC assessments. So I've been working with assessments for a really long time, but I didn't know when would be the time to introduce that to my daughter. So that was actually a school initiative. I think in the 9th grade, part of she had a course called Career Prep here in Alabama. She goes to Sparkman High School, and they actually administered it to the whole class. So I was really excited when she came home and brought her reports, showing me what her test results were. And based on our experience, that was extremely clear to us that that's really accurate.
When I was in the 9th grade, I don't believe we were offered personality tests or career planning. But thank goodness the education environment has matured to a place where they can help kind of steer kids' interests based on what their responses are, and help them get connected with the careers.
Two areas I think are critical for schools, and there's so many other areas, but two areas that I did not have the benefit of career planning, but then also financial management. I think those are two critical competencies that students need to build from high school age.
All right, and the last thing that I want to get from you, I think it's the last thing, is can you share with us any professional accomplishment that you're just uniquely proud of out of all the things that you've done so many cool things? Is there anything that really stands out?
Oh my goodness. Oh gosh, I think one of the things I'm proud of is being able to go to Guyana and to contribute to the region, because for a really long time I felt like I couldn't do that, because I felt like developing countries, they need scientists, they need doctors, they need dentists, they need people from those, they need engineers. And I really felt like that's what they needed. So to have the opportunity to go as an organizational development specialist, as a learning specialist, to work in the region, I mean, I was just most grateful for that opportunity, that there was a need for my skill set within this environment. And yeah, I think that's one of my major accomplishments.
Yeah, thanks for this. As I'm just kind of rolling back to our conversation in my head, the messenger is really impactful in terms of communicating effectively. And whatever I can do to bring education, inspiration, you just kind of reaffirmed that all the modalities are important in terms of connecting with the audience in the wide range of interests and backgrounds and all the different filters that we have. We can't just communicate one way. We got to communicate lots of ways so that the messages get through.
Definitely.
Dr. Oti, this was fantastic. I'm so glad you brought up your research. That loaded me with a lot of thinking.
Okay, good. No, my pleasure. I really enjoyed the opportunity to share.
Right.
And continue doing what you're doing. Wonderful work.
I want to invite the audience to like this video and subscribe to our channel so you can see all of our updates. Thank you, Dr. Oti. It was so wonderful talking to you today.
The pleasure is mine. Have a wonderful rest of your day.